Hey, what's up, everyone? My name's Chris. I'm here with Pascal. Hey, Pascal.
Hello.
So, I told you right before we started the video, now tell people, the reason I want to talk to you is because I read your book, The Hair Kick, and I met you a couple times back at Singularity, and I think you have a great story that of like risk-taking and finding yourself and just kind of figuring it all out, but in that very, we'll say, uncertain way every time. And it's cool because you hear all these videos of like all these big, like Steve Jobs is, and you're like, oh, well, they're just one person. It's like, no, those people, there are more people like that. And you need to just look for them. And when you find them, you realize, oh, wow, like, there really are like these inspirational people in the world that are doing it, that just aren't like a single
So just so we're clear, I'm not Steve Jobs, right?
Not Steve Jobs,
Just
yeah.
clear here.
But an idea of, I want to say following your heart. Is that the right word to it? Following yourself, I guess. And so, let's just jump into one of the stories. Want to talk about Google?
Sure.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so my Google story is probably a little unusual. I used to work at Mozilla, that make up the Firefox web browser, for about 5 years, 4.5 years, which is pretty long for me. So I typically stay at a company for about 3 years. And then felt I needed to do something differently, and an opportunity came along to become one of the principals over at google.org. Very small team at the time, it's about 5 people, like really tiny.
Okay.
And I thought it was perfect. It was great. It's like, it was this interesting nexus, this intersection between investing into nonprofits, working with nonprofits, which are at this intersection of tech and global impact.
Okay.
And it's a thing I had a deep passion, still have a very deep passion in, and had done a bunch of work in. So I thought it was amazing. So I joined them, and then after about 6-8 weeks on the job, I just realized it just doesn't work out for me. And mostly less so because of anything Google did, and it's all about me, right? So I realized being at a big company is not the right thing for me, and Google is just a damn big company. It's like 50,000 people, right? And you feel it. I felt it.
Yeah.
So I went to my boss and said, like, listen, this is not working out, and I quite literally 90 days after I joined, like pretty much to the day, 90 days after I joined, I left them, which caused a little bit of head scratching for quite a few of my friends who were like, man, you just got into Google, which is like a dream, right? There's a ton of people who want to get into Google, and Google is notoriously hard to get into. And you left them after 90 days, including the recruiter who got me into Google from Google called me and said,
Dude, what the heck?
dude, like,
Yeah.
you're like the quickest person I've ever seen leave Google, and you know what went wrong. And it's really nothing wrong with Google. Like I've got the deepest admiration for the company.
Okay.
And I work a lot with Google from the outside, right? And it's super fun. It's just like when I was on the inside, it was just like, it wasn't right for me. And then, I took the consequences.
So I guess the question is, so I guess related to your idea of boring consistency, how do you know it's not just you're feeling bored and you shouldn't give it a little longer, or I just, there's something in me that just knows this isn't right, and I don't know how to explain that, but I know it.
Right.
Like, how do you know the difference?
It's a really good question. I probably don't.
Yeah.
In all fairness, right? So I don't know if I would have sticked it out for like another, 3 months, 6 months, a year, if things would have turned around. And probably they would have, and likely they would have. In my case, like, I just felt in my gut like it's a too big a company. I love being in smaller companies, and I kind of knew that about myself, but ignored it when I got the call to join Google. And then, to be honest, like, the trigger for me to leave Google was I was walking. I had a friend over at lunch at Google, and we walked across the campus, and I told him about my misery. And he looked around, and it was like, you will get a job like this anytime, so why don't you quit, right? And there's a luxury in having the ability to choose, right? I mean, so make no mistake, I left Google in a position where I knew that I would find a job here in Silicon Valley. That is a reality which is not true for everyone, right? And in my case, I earned that privilege probably by working for 20 years in Silicon Valley, and just knowing a lot of people and having done hopefully pretty good job at the jobs I did.
Yeah.
So I've got a lot of like social credit I could trade.
Okay.
Right. So I think it's important to understand is like, I'm not advocating for like everyone to just like, oh yeah, I don't like my job, I quit.
Yeah.
right? There's a reality. It's like you need to pay your bills, and I was in the luxurious position to say, even if I can't pay my bills for 6 months, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Right. So all these like things you need to consider.
Yeah. Interesting. So, because Google's big, isn't Mozilla? Or at the time when you were there, was Mozilla as big?
So Mozilla was tiny when I joined. When I joined, we were less than 100 people,
Okay.
Which is really the sweet spot for me. It's like I love organizations which are a little bit grown up, like they have a bit of structure, but are not like monsters yet.
Yeah.
And when I left Mozilla, the organization grew to about 600 people, and it's now about 1,000 people, but so still comparatively small, but too big for me.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons why I felt I needed to do something differently.
So then what's, I guess, what is doing something different?
What's doing something different? You mean
What, like-
what's doing something different today, or?
No, so I guess you're at Google and you knew, I'm not really happy, I want to do something different.
Sure.
But when you left, like, you didn't have a plan, right? It was more like,
No, I
I
didn't
just
have a
know I
plan.
don't want to do this.
Yes.
So with that sense, like how, I guess what made you comfortable with not really having a plan aside from, I know you'll get a job anywhere?
Well, at the time, I think for me it was I had enough other interesting projects, like personal projects,
Okay.
I just wanted to pursue. So my wife, a little earlier, founded a nonprofit called the Coaching Fellowship, where we provide executive pro bono coaching to young women in leadership positions all around the world.
Okay.
And it was clear that that needs some work. So there was opportunity for me to just like jump in and do that. It's unpaid, like it's a labor of love, but it kept me busy.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting work. So I started doing that. I knew that I wanted to write a little bit more. I knew that I wanted to work on my speaking skills, so go out and speak a little bit more. So there were all these like other things I wanted to pursue anyway. So it wasn't like I quit Google and then I bum out and sit at home and play Xbox.
Yeah.
So it was pretty clear that there was work for me to do.
Yeah. Like you were not going to not be busy either way. So I guess on that note, you had also mentioned the Heretic is, I think you were talking about you used to work you used to work for like conventions, right? Like you were a mic runner, and you would say you get home, you burnt out, and you're like, I'm done. And the next one, like, man, I can't wait to do it all over again.
Yes.
So do you ever get burnt out, or you enjoy everything you do?
This is a very good question. I think that for me, at least, most of the time, those two go hand in hand, right? So I do enjoy what I do, and I have probably a compulsive streak in me, which gets me to like dig really deep into the stuff I'm doing.
Okay.
Which then results in me burning out somewhat. And the story I tell in the book is when I was in college, I used to work at trade shows and basically like do stage entertainment and such.
Okay.
And I loved it, and it's just like I loved it because it's like 12-hour adrenaline rush, right? You're like on stage and you do it's like high powered and so on, and you do it for a couple days, and it burns you out. I mean, it's really exhausting, right? So you come back, and the two things that happen is like, A, you're tired to the bone.
Yeah.
But secondly, you also miss the rush, right? Because like you wake up and you're like, okay, so today's just a normal day. It's like no action, And it's
yes.
interesting because you hear the same story. It's really fascinating because you hear the same story a bit with people in the military, right? So they go on the deployment, and they're like, let's say they're in Afghanistan, and they're on all the time, and there's adrenaline rush all the time, right? And it's a very, very, like nothing I can even relate to in terms of like the realness of the situation, because you could get killed, right?
Yeah.
And then they come home, and then that is all gone.
Yeah.
And they fall into like some form of depression, right? So not on that level, but
Yeah.
it's somewhat a similar like origin story for me.
Yeah.
And then, so for me, those go hand in hand, right? So the notion of like, I tend to go all in, and that then leads to some form of burnout. So I started over the years, I started to learn to regulate this a little bit better.
Okay.
And also to be like, to be kind to myself and give myself these downtimes when I know that I will be probably a little down because like I don't have the adrenaline of like, action, but I know it's really important to recharge my batteries.
Yeah. So, how do you know when to say no to something then? Like, oh, that sounds like a good project I want to be part of, and you're like, that sounds pretty cool, but no, I gotta focus on what I have. I don't want to get
It's interesting.
too much.
Yeah. So I think there's two no's, right? There's the one no, which is there's something you get and like intellectually you probably think you should do it, but like in your gut you already know you shouldn't, right?
Yeah.
I got much
Yeah.
better to just listen to my gut now. Like I literally like a friend of mine, Daniel Epstein, who runs the Unreasonable Institute, Unreasonable Group. He calls your gut the faster brain, which in a lot of ways is true.
Okay.
It's like I mean, we all have been in this situation where our gut was already telling us like, you should do this or you shouldn't get involved with this,
Yeah.
and then our brain basically overrode this, and we went into the situation, and then it turned out that our gut was right. And I have numerous of those occasions, so I started to learn to. If I have a really gut feeling, I'm like, I should do it. So let's say no.
Yeah.
And I got much better with that. The second no is my gut tells me I should do it, my brain tells me I should do it, but I really I'm overexerting myself, or it diverts me from the other thing I want to do. Right? That's a much harder no for me, because that's where you're like your
the
inner
practicality.
demons. Yeah, your inner demons
Yeah.
are fighting with each other, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, man, it would be really cool to do this thing here, but I should really not because
just
I need to
know.
focus on this other thing.
Yeah.
Right? In which case, what I found is helpful is in the extreme forms of that, where I really need to think about it, or it's really important to me, I just write it down. I learned to write down here's the pros and cons. Here's the expected outcomes. Here's what could go wrong. And for me, at least, the act of committing it to paper is incredibly helpful, because very often in my head where I thought oh, this is an amazing thing, I need to do this, or this really amazing opportunity, when you write it down, you're like, nah, it's actually not that big, or vice versa. You say oh, this is this tiny thing, I'm not sure if I should do it. You write it down, you're like, whoa, wait, there's something really interesting in here which I
Yeah.
haven't seen before.
Yeah.
So committing it to paper is a really helpful exercise. It slows down your thinking.
I've noticed that, because when you're thinking in your head, right? I'll think about I'm on the bus or something, and thoughts just they go really fast, and you'll tangent all the time. But I notice on paper, I'll sit there today I want to do this,
Right.
and I'll realize, wow, I'm taking it every single little
Yes.
word.
Yes. Well, it's the same with journaling, right? So I'm not a
Yeah.
particularly good journaler, which is a constant struggle for me, because I actually want to be a good journaler.
Yeah.
But I really believe in the practice of journaling, because it forces you to get the stuff out of your head, so you can compartmentalize it, and it's out of your head, it's on paper.
Yeah.
But it also slows you down.
So, is the Heretic newsletter your form of journaling?
It is, to a certain extent, yes. So the newsletter, it really, when I started it, was a way for me to process the stuff I experience. So let's say we have a conversation, right?
Okay.
And you say something interesting to me, and I'm it lingers in my head, right? And say you say something about, I don't know, in your world, digital marketing, right?
Okay.
And there's something you said, and it's wow, this was interesting, and it's lingering in my head. The newsletter is really helpful for me, because I take that snippet, and then explore it in my own world, right? I'm okay, so I had this conversation. I literally, when you read my newsletter, very often it starts out with yesterday I spoke to another entrepreneur talking
Yeah.
about X, right? And then I take it, and the act of me explaining it to others. This goes back to the age-old notion of if you want to learn something, teach it to someone else,
Okay.
right? Because then you really learn it.
Yeah.
So for me, it's an ability to slow myself down, to put it into words, which I hope other people will understand and learn from.
Yeah.
And that helps me to understand and process it better. So yes, in a way it is journaling, but it's a public form of journaling,
Okay.
right? I think there's a very private form of journaling, which is really more about my inner demons and all that stuff, which you probably wouldn't put in a newsletter.
Yeah. Interesting. So, you have the newsletter, and then you have this Facebook group. I know you start Patreon. Is your goal to, I guess, turn the Heretic into something bigger, where you're more just no, this is my way of connecting with everyone I talked to so far?
It's a really good question. I don't think I have a real goal with that thing. I tend to do, it's totally opportunistic, right? So I'm not seeing this as oh, this is my brand, or this is a media empire, or I'm becoming a YouTube whatever celebrity,
Yeah.
and I'm building this. It's for me is a really nice way to connect with a community of like-minded people. It's a really, really nice. I mean, community is awesome. Like every time I write a heretic, I get a bunch of people like just reply, because when you reply, you get like it goes straight to my inbox basically,
Oh
right?
wow.
And there's always a bunch of people who are replying and like sharing their own stories and really connecting. And then I started Patreon a little while ago just to like cover the cost, basically saying like I'm paying a bunch of money for like just hosting and such, and I was like probably like some people would pinch like chip in.
Yeah.
And then I figured, like, let's do something special for these Patreon people. So the Patreon people get, there's a WhatsApp group, which is pretty fun and active.
Yeah.
And then I started, because I consume a lot of media, blog posts mostly. So every week now I basically do a little write-up of like, hey, here's the most interesting stuff I read this week, which seems to be useful for people. But again, like, with so many things in my life, I'm not looking at this as a like this is a planned thing. It's just like I stumbled into it.
Oh, that's what this is pretty much. Yeah, that's literally
totally.
that's what I said when you're passionate. Like, no, it's just something to do, I guess. Something I like doing.
Yeah.
And it's just turning into something.
Which is great, yeah.
Yeah. One thing I admire about you is the idea of always doing what matters.
I try.
You try. So, let me get into like technology and impacting the world and all that. But how do you, I guess, where would you, I guess, motivate or inspire people that aren't necessarily like entrepreneurs or have money or went to college and all that? Like maybe someone like in the inner city
Sure.
that's like never been exposed to like money or technology and all that. How would you kind of guess get them on board to be like, hey, this you do have an impact on the world every day, like you should do that, as opposed to like them thinking, I have you, you're doing it already, why should I have to do it? I'm just gonna coast it while people like you take care of the world for me.
Well, first of all, I don't think that's actually the reality these days.
Okay.
Right? It's like I believe we all see, and regardless where you are on the spectrum, like we all see that the world's problems are so daunting that I think we all should do something about them. And I think the challenge with that is like they can be so daunting that we're looking at them like, holy shit, I can't make a difference, right? Like you take something like climate change, like what can I change with climate change, right? It's like such a massive topic. And at the same time, my invitation is always find something you connect to, like find a problem space you connect to. And I think we all connect to something, and try to make a difference there, right? So, if climate change doesn't speak to you, or if it feels too big and too daunting, by all means, like, be my guest, don't do it. But we can all, like, at the very least, give the homeless person who's sitting on the street, a little bit of money, or help them, or just even smile at them and acknowledge that they're human beings and not like outcasts, right? So I think that's one. The second one is, I keep telling people this, that they're always like, there's this misconception of, well, we all need to do good in the world, which means it needs to be socially beneficial. It needs to be like an NGO thing, whatever. Okay. And my view is that I don't actually think that's true. It's like you need to figure out like what makes you tick, what's important to you, and then make sure that the thing what is important to you affects your community in a positive way, right? So here's the thing. So if you want to make money, by all means, make money. Okay. Right? If you happen to use that money then to pay for, I don't know, your aging parents to have a better home, that's fantastic, right? Like, who am I to judge you on that? Yeah. Right? Are you changing the world? Probably, I don't know. For your parents, you do, for sure, right? So I think it's really just like understanding that like we are more than us. Like we are more than just like us individually. We are connected in a community. Yeah. And whatever that community looks like for you, right? For some people, it's like, well, they need to save the oceans, and all the power in the world's to them. And for other people, it's like, well, my community is really only like my family or my friends, right? And do something good for them. If we were all to do this, here's the thing, right? So if we were all to like positively impact and focus on like and be deliberate about positively impacting our communities in one way or the other, like this whole planet would be in a much better shape. Simple as that.
Oh. So impact no matter isn't necessarily solving global warming. It's just.
I have a friend in New York he's a banker, right, in New York. So like probably the furthest you can possibly be removed from like positive impact on the world, right? And he knows it, and he's fine with it, right?
Yeah.
And he loves his lifestyle, like he makes a ton of money, and he loves his lifestyle, and like by all means, like all power to you, right? His thing is like he walks through New York and he picks up trash. Like when he sees trash on the ground, he's got this thing where he's like he doesn't like trash on the ground, so
Yeah.
he just picks other people's trash and puts it in the trash can, right? So does he have a like, what's his net positive impact? Is he going to change the world? No. Is he making New York City a little bit more livable? Yeah, hell yeah.
Interesting. You remember Kyle, right?
Yeah.
So he taught me that. Literally, so I met him at Singularity, and next time we were like, hey, let's get coffee and walk around. And we were walking, and he would just saw him pick up trash and walk with it. We did no trash, and I'm like, what are you doing there? He's like, when needs to be thrown away. I'm like, well, there's no trash. I'm like, I'll just throw it when I get home. And he put it in his pocket. I'm like, you know what? I don't know why I don't do that. Like, I don't know why I used to be speed, and I started doing that now. We're all walking like, oh, McDonald's wrapper.
Yeah.
Trash can 2 blocks away. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and again, like like there might be people who are like, I don't want to pick up other people's trash, and that's also fine, right? Just think about like, I used to sign my emails. I actually do still sign a lot of my emails with like Build What Matters, right? It's like just figure out like how can you understanding you're part of something which is much bigger than you are, which is like all of humanity, this planet, your community, whatever your focal events is. And just figure out like how can you make a positive impact. Then everybody can do that. Everybody can do that.
So then how do you, I don't know if it's finding yourself. How do you find like what's your way of impacting the community?
I think most people know intuitively. I think most people are drawn to something. Like they are connected to something. And I would just like, I always tell people like go in generally, right? Like in terms of like where do you think you want to take your life? Like where do you want to take your business, etc. Just bring it toward the point where you feel energetically connected. Like what gives you energy, right? And by the way, this can go two ways, right? So one is like what gives you energy? Like what is the stuff when you do it makes you feel really good? And for some people it's like, I don't know, like teaching kids, right?
Okay.
It gives them a lot of energy, so they become teachers or like they help out in after school programs or something. And then for others, it's the exact opposite. So it's like what makes you really angry, right? Like so Kyle, for example, might be really angry that people throw shit on the ground, right? So how do you turn that into a positive? Well, you pick it up, right? So it's an indicator of like something which is important to you. If you get angry about something, it's something which is important to you because it's clearly important for you enough for you to get angry about it.
Yeah.
Right. So connect to that.
Oh, so it's finding what you care about. Like either. Oh, interesting.
And it can go both ways, right?
So question, because like as we talk, like I guess the I don't know, the logic, it all sounds so simple. Like yeah, if you don't like that, then do something about it. But I guess why does it feel so? Why does that like aspect of finding yourself feel so complicated or like daunting?
So I think it's actually simple. I think it's we probably make it hard for ourselves. I think we're such heady creatures, right? That we think a lot of us think in way too bigger terms, right? So you think about I don't know, like let's go back to climate change, right? It's like so you're looking at climate change, you're upset about climate change. And then you look at, like, you get really heady, you start reading up on it, and you're like, oh my god, like, I can't change this, like, like...
Yeah.
And then that becomes so daunting that you don't know what your first step is. And then people don't do it. So my take is, don't let it bog you down, be much more pragmatic about it, and just... It literally goes to, like, what is your first step? There's this beautiful story about it's a true story about the British rowing team.
Rowing?
Like rowing.
Okay.
Like on a lake or river.
Yeah.
So the British rowing team, rowing is a really big thing in the UK. If you know anything, there's this like big rivalry between two universities, Cambridge and Oxford. They row on the River Thames, a big thing. They haven't won the Olympics for like 40 years or something until like 2000. And they had a new coach, right? And again, this is a national sport, so it's really embarrassing for them to not win.
Yeah.
So the new coach comes into the team and says like, okay, so I don't actually want you to think about winning. I don't care. What I want to do is I want to figure out like everything we do, we ask ourselves, will it make the boat go faster? So when we start training, you ask ourselves, does this particular training will make the boat go faster? When we design the boat, like the hull of the boat, right, will it make the boat go faster?
Okay.
Like when we go out and go drinking in the night, right, will it make the boat go faster in the morning? Which might be true, right, because you feel better and you're more energized and whatever, right?
Yeah.
So what they did is they did these tiny improvements, right, like mini, tiny improvements, right, like 1% here, 1% there, 1% there. And granted, in the Sydney Olympics 2000, whatever it was, 2000 I think, they won the world medal, the Olympic gold medal.
Yeah.
And since then they're undefeated. And the point being that if you make a 1% improvement in yourself, in your business, in whatever you want to pick, and you do this consecutively for 365 days, so 1 year, the end result is a 38 times improvement.
Interesting.
Right? So the whole point
Yeah.
being, like I think the misconception is that people think the world is going to change by these heroic, massive efforts. And every once in a while that happens.
Yeah.
But in the vast amount of cases, it's actually someone chipping away at the problem like 1%, tiny little improvements over and over and over again. But they compound and create these massive outcomes.
So it's just that focus and patience then.
Mm-hmm.
That overall theme of like, oh, cool.
It's like this is like alleged Indians saying, what's the best way to eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Oh, what? Interesting. That's cool. So when did you learn that? Or I guess when did that like notion of like focus and patience and simplicity or boring consistency, like, when did that finally click with you? I didn't learn that until like a year ago.
Right. It's a good question. For me, it was I got frustrated because early in my career I tried these like ambitious, audacious things, right? Like I built a company when I came out of college and raised quite a bit of money for it, and we tried to do this amazing thing, and I tried to do it in this like one heroic step, because
Okay.
that was what I thought is the way to do this, right? Like you work really hard and then overnight you turn this thing into the success.
Yeah.
And reality is like that's just not how it works, right? And most of the time, like every once in a while, you've got a weird outlier,
Okay.
but that's not typically what happens. I think I just learned by observing the reality and like being open to let it influence my thinking.
Yeah.
And then years later, I started reading up on it, and I started like reading this, Indian proverb, and then I heard about the story about the British rowing team and so on.
Yeah.
I'm not like, oh yeah, sure, of course, now it makes sense. But yeah, I mean, if you look at like the irony is like lots of people look at these overnight successes, and 99% of like what we call an overnight success was actually like 10 years in the making or something.
Yeah.
Right? It's like these people who have been chipping away at their craft or at their companies or at their products forever, and then suddenly, like they hit this weird inflection point and it becomes like this.
Yeah.
And because we as humans tend to look at like the short period, like the shorter time spans, we're like, oh my God, look at this! Like they came out of nowhere and like built this amazing thing. You
Yeah.
know? And then like, yeah, sure, but that team
There's
had
more to
like
it than that.
they had like 3 startups before
Yeah.
the success, and they all 3 failed, and
Yeah.
they kept doing it again and again. That kind of story.
Interesting. So, what time is it? I gotta go. That's one last question. Now that you're like a lot older, you have a lot of experience, you're really into your career. Do you still have, I guess, like role models or people from your childhood that are like, oh, I'm
Totally.
doing this because who are your
My role models.
Pascals?
Oh man, there's a bunch. I think there's a lot of people in my circle of friends who I really see as role models for many reasons. There's a guy called Kevin Starr, who is the founder of Mulago Foundation, which is a non-profit working on the bottom of the pyramid, poverty alleviation, doing incredible work. He's been doing this for like 20 plus years, and I just look at him like just in awe of what he achieved and like the way he operates. There's people like Daniel Epstein, who's 10 years younger than I am, who built the Unreasonable Institute,
Yeah.
and then Unreasonable Group later. And it's just, I'm in awe of like his energy and like the way he's like, his audaciousness, right? There's people like Mike Smith, who's, I don't know, like 20 years younger than I am.
Okay.
who built an organization called Skate for Change, which is this global network of like skaters doing good in the world. And he goes to high schools and teaches kids about like building what matters, right? There's so many people. It's like, I think here's the thing, right? So in my world, like I don't have these singular focused role models where I'm like, oh my God, I want to be like Steve Jobs or something. For me, I see all these people, like there's so many incredible, incredible people out there, and they're everywhere, and they're in your everyday life. And you know, for me, I see these like there's these aspects, these facets to them where I'm like, oh my God, like this is something I really admire about them, or this particular thing is just amazing, right? So for me, it's like I link to those things.
I want to ask more questions. I'll ask more questions I want to. So are you ever gonna retire?
If I am going to retire, I don't think so. I love working too much. Will I retire from like a job? Sure. Will I retire from like doing stuff?
Just-
No.
So do you get days off? Do you ever have days off in your life?
Yeah, sure.
What's a day off for you?
Days off for me is like typically when I really unplug. So like I don't check email, I don't look at my phone. I just have a book, be with my wife. I like to be in nature, like really disconnect.
Yeah.
And so disconnect from tech, but connect with nature and the world.
Yeah.
Right. So I really enjoy like moments of, in some way like solitude.
In nature.
Yeah, like
That immersion of like just
Yeah,
being
yeah,
in
exactly.
a forest and just like, wow, like this is an actual
Right.
forest. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. All right, Pascal, I'm gonna here. Thank you so much.
You're
It's a
so
lot of
welcome.
fun.
Thank you.
All right, bye everyone.